about how they approach God and how they think about God in everyday life. And so while ritual impurity isn't necessarily a moral category, it is something God uses, I think, to help his people understand the purity, the holiness of his nature. And so what I've done in this sheet here is just taken some kind of big ideas. And this actually, for the most part, comes from a commentary I've been using on Leviticus. And it kind of maps out some of the big ideas. And so God and the divine are associated with life, the forces of life, right? Creation, that which is normal, obedience, the sacred, the most holy area, and so forth. But then you have these kind of gradations, to that which is less holy, or people who are maybe not as fully consecrated as others, right? Or sins that are less severe, and so forth. But on the other side of it, you have the column, the forces of death, right? So the opposite of creation is chaos. Normality is disorder. The opposite of obedience is disobedience. Sacred, profane. God, dead is the way the author put it. Like, why that? Well, in the ancient Israelite way of thinking, right? To be in the land of the living is to be to have access to the God of life, but to be dead is to, where is their remembrance of God in Sheol, some of the psalmists speak about. They didn't have that view of the afterlife that we take for granted because of Christ. Okay, something that wasn't revealed at that time, and you can look at that. But these values have a way of kind of stacking on each other and helping Israel live in this ordered life in a very disordered world. Okay, or a world that seems very disordered at times. So just something to keep track of there. Now, back to the main lesson in Leviticus. So last week we talked about the food laws, about what's on the menu, right? And if you're in these parts, there's going to be a lot of good edible food coming our way this summer. All those locusts. I don't think those are the same kind of locusts mentioned in the Bible, but locusts were considered a clean animal, surprisingly enough. And there were certain animals that, for a variety of reasons, were considered unclean, unfit for Israelite consumption, and we're not entirely sure why. But sometimes it doesn't matter so much why. Okay, I remember asking my parents a lot when I was a kid, why? Why shouldn't I do this? Why do I need to brush my teeth? Why do I need? And after a while, they get tired, like, because I said so. Because I'm your parent, right? And God has his reasons. He had his reasons, but some of them we just don't know. But this is what God put in place to help his people become a pure, distinct, holy nation. Separate from the rest of the world, but separate in a way that would bear witness to the truth of the living God. Okay? And when we ended our discussion a little bit last week talking about what holiness looks like for Christians today, we don't follow the food laws, really. I mean, if you want to, that's fine. If you want to refrain from pork, more power to you. If you want to eat crickets, have at it. But that's not what makes a person impure or pure, right? Jesus said that what defiles a person isn't what goes into the body, what comes out of the heart. Okay? Jesus really focuses in his ministry on that inside-out purity. Okay? Moral purity. Now, this section here in Leviticus, chapters 11 through 15, contains so many laws on purity, and we could spend months unpacking this stuff, but I'm going to try to get through the bulk of it today. So let's hit it. Leviticus chapter 12. This little chapter is on childbirth. When a woman gave birth to a child, she passed through a period of separation before being fully reintegrated into society, and able to enter sacred space, like the tabernacle, okay? And in addition to having a ritual function, I think there very well could have been a practical function to this. Mothers need that time to bond with a child. There's also physical vulnerabilities, especially in the ancient world where infant mortality rates were so high, where complications after pregnancy for the mother or after delivery were very high as well. And so it was probably for the benefit of the mother and child to take that time away and not be overly engaged in outward affairs. Okay. Next slide. So, but as with the dietary laws, the focus again isn't so much on hygiene. The main idea is holiness, purity. Okay, and think of it this way: blood loss. Blood we know we associate with life. Okay, blood loss involved in childbirth is something that requires special ritual precaution. Okay, because there's been this loss of life-giving fluid in the process of bringing life into the world. Okay, and so it'll take a time for the mother to be whole and able to reintegrate into society and enter into the presence of a holy God. Okay, so it has to do again with this stuff about life and death, about order and disorder, normal and disorder, normal and disorder, I guess. Okay, this is fun stuff. Next slide. So what are the rules here involving purity, becoming pure again after giving birth? Well, it differs depending on the gender of the child. Okay, if the child is male, the mother spends a week at home. Okay, and so separation from society and separation from sacred space. Okay, and then an additional 33 days where she's able to re-engage society but not enter into the tabernacle. She's not ritually contagious anymore, but she's not ready yet to re-enter the tabernacle. And now, something I find interesting here is notice that this period of rigorous separation ends after 7 days. And what takes place on the 8th day for an Israelite boy? Circumcision, right? Entering into the covenant, okay? And so the mother would then have been able to attend, to be a part of that special ceremony, okay? So there may have been a kind of a practical reason for ending it on day 7, and then being able to be a part of the circumcision on the 8th day. Now, what about with little girls? Next slide. The time frame doubles if the child is a girl. Okay. So the mother spends 2 weeks at home, 14 days, and in that period of rigorous separation, and then 66 days. So again, double the period of time away from the tabernacle, away from holy things. And a lot of readers, and I'm one of them, look at this and say, what's up with this? Were little girls considered just more impure in ancient society? What is this just some kind of a patriarchal mindset at work here? What's the issue? A lot of debate about this. I'm not sure I can give you a great answer. Here's one answer that I find fascinating, and this may have to do something with ancient views of fetal development. So there are a number of Greek authors and some outside the Greek world. In the Greek world, Aristotle and Hippocrates are often mentioned, who believe that the male fetus developed matured more quickly in the mother's womb. And I think it's even Aristotle who says that the male fetus, what is it? I can't remember. It's like about 40 days ahead. It's something like that, 40 days and 80 days till they become, recognizably human or something like that. Again, they didn't have ultrascans, they didn't have things like that in the ancient world. But there was like this lag of 40 days. And some people think that, that view might be reflected, a similar view reflected here in the text. And so maybe it was considered that the little girl needs a little more time with her mom to be more fully developed. I don't know. Sometimes that's the best answer I can give you. Do you have any insight? Do you know? Because I'm all ears. Yeah. Mhm. Well, very true. Yeah. 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 Mhm. The women in the village family would have come over and yeah, yeah. I don't know. So, mm, yeah, yeah. Well, girls seem hardier to me. You know, so yeah, yeah. Some of the things to take out as guys, women seem to be able to weather much better. my mom, my mom has a much higher pain threshold than my dad ever did. Anyway, we'll just leave it at that. Thank God for Jesus. Okay, next slide. I wanted to say a little bit about this because these laws about purification after childbirth do play a role in the New Testament. So you might remember this in Luke chapter 2. Luke goes out of his way to demonstrate that Mary and Joseph were good, law-abiding Jews. And he mentions that after Christ's birth, they took part in three major ritual observances associated with the birth of a firstborn son. They had him circumcised on the eighth day. They dedicated him to the Lord. Okay, there was the firstborn had to be like redeemed. That's something mentioned in the book of Exodus and elsewhere. And they also made the purification offering. Okay, sometimes called the sin offering, but again, this wasn't because of a sin. This was to purify, to make readmission into sacred space possible. So this is when Mary and Joseph bring Jesus to the temple. And Luke tells us that they offered the sacrifices that were required, which would have been a purification offering and a whole burnt offering. And that could be pretty expensive, right? You know, like bring a sheep or whatever, you know, involved. And so there is a special allowance made for the poor that they could bring 2 turtle doves or pigeons instead. And that's what they bring. So it shows you something about Mary and Joseph's economic status. They bring the offering allowed for the poor. Okay? Jesus was not born with a silver spoon in his mouth. He spent his first night in a feeding trough. Think about that. All right, any questions? Right? Yeah. You think about how Jesus came into this world, and it seems like the very epitome of uncleanliness. But you know, God's showing us something about His humility, His willingness to come to us where we are, to bring us to where we need to be with Him. Let's go on to the next slide. I'll move to my favorite section now. We're going to go to Leviticus 15. Well, I could not find a good picture for this, and I didn't even try. Laws pertaining to sexual discharges. Yes, there's a whole chapter devoted to this. This is usually the part in the Bible reading plan where people say, you know what, I just give up. I don't get this. I'm just going to stick with my New Testament from now on. But there's this whole section about sexual discharges. And I will try to move through this rapidly. Why are they present? Why is this a concern? Is it just an ick factor? I don't think that's what's involved here, because there are lots of bodily fluids that are not addressed, that are just as, if not more so. Okay? So what is going on? Next slide. Well, I think it's similar to the regulations for childbirth. Anything involving reproduction, involving life-giving, okay, is an area of concern here. And we're dealing in this chapter with the loss of life-giving fluids, be it blood, or water, semen, etc. And the idea, I think, again, is that a person must be in a state of wholeness in order to approach a holy God, right? And God puts a high value on life and on these powerful reproductive forces, and so they demand special care and attention, okay? So, yeah, not so much about, there's no really concern about spitting, or vomiting or things, but anything of a sexual nature related to these life-giving forces, there's regulation involved. Well, let's look at some of these regulations in a very superficial, cursory way. Okay, next slide. So as far as basic sexual relations, that wasn't considered to be especially unclean. I mean, that's something that's a regular, God-ordained, natural part of life between husband and wife. And so sexual relations resulted in uncleanliness that lasted until evening. Okay? Same with nocturnal emissions. All right? And these were all remedied with bathing and washing of clothes. Enough said. Next slide. Now, as far as a woman's monthly period, there are some special regulations in place, a period of uncleanliness, ritual uncleanliness for 7 days. And anyone who, like the husband, touches his wife, or this gets a little, or sits on the bedding where she's been, or on anything where she's been seated, contracts that uncleanliness until evening. So there's like the second degree uncleanliness that is acquired briefly. But the woman remains in this period of separation for 7 days. Just bringing something maybe not quite as, maybe a little more lighthearted. You remember in the book of Genesis, when Jacob's wife, Rachel, absconds with some of her father's household gods. Remember what she does? She hides them in the saddle. And Laban goes searching through all the tents and can't find these household gods. And he finally goes into Rachel's tent. And she's seated on the saddle. And she says, "Excuse me, Father, I can't get up because I'm in the manner of women." He's like, "Oh, yeah, just stay put." This is pre-Mosaic law, right? But this seems to have been a pretty common recognition in that society, right? So he doesn't want to disturb her and doesn't want to, contract this ritual impurity, right? And a very shrewd use of the of the feminine card there by Rachel, right? Man, some of those people in Genesis, the matriarchs and patriarchs, they're just so conniving. Jacob and Rachel really deserved each other. Anyway, to have sexual contact with a woman in her monthly uncleanliness, and this seems to be more of a maybe accidental, or right is the right word, because later on it talks about like more severe penalties, but the partner is unclean for 7 days. And then this period of 7 days for the woman ends with a ritual bath. Why do I bring this up? This plays an important role in the story of David and Bathsheba. You remember David's out on the roof of his palace looking out over the city, and he sees this beautiful woman bathing. And I've heard preachers say, well, she was just out there looking for attention. It's not what the text says. You know what the text says she was doing? She was following the purity laws. She was cleansing herself after her monthly period. And I think so many people want to go through the story of David and Bathsheba and find some way of portraying Bathsheba as an accomplice, when the text is pretty clear that David's the aggressor in the situation. So I think it's a rather shameful way of reading the text. She's following the law. David is not. All right? Questions, comments? All right, some of these laws, next slide, seem a little harsh to me, a little impractical. And I'm a dude, so, but again, these are states of ritual impurity, not moral impurity. There's no moral judgment being placed here, okay? But again, I do think some of these laws seem harsh and impractical to our way of thinking. Maybe this is another thank God for Jesus moment. I don't know. Now, oh, it gets better. I'm going to repeat really fast. There's a section on other sexual discharges. So the first part of Leviticus 15 focuses a lot on, next slide, on abnormal male sexual discharges. And a lot of scholars think we're talking here about discharges brought on by venereal disease. Surprise, surprise, was quite common in the ancient world. And these diseases, in addition to being physically contagious, were also considered highly ritually contagious. So there are all these precautions about, if you touch a guy who's in this state, or if you sit on his bedding, or if you whatever, or if he spits on you, okay, then this ritual impurity is contracted for like a day or something, and one has to bathe and so forth. I had a professor in Bible college describe the purity laws as kind of an ancient form of the cooties. I don't know. I think there's more going on here than that, but it made the class erupt in laughter. So, but I don't know what you guys think about vaccinations for the cooties, but I always made sure before I went to school that I got my cootie shot. Dot, circle, circle, dot, dot. Now I've got my cootie shot. I would recommend that for any kindergartner. Did you not have the cootie shots? Circle, circle, dot, dot. Now I've got my cootie shots. Oh, come on. What's that? Okay. So the deal with these venereal discharges is once the man's condition clears up, he goes through a 7-day period of purification, and then on the 8th day, sacrifices have to be made. So this tells you something about the nature of this impurity. It's more serious, much more serious than just sexual relations or the impurity during a woman's monthly cycle. This requires more than a ritual bath or so forth. You have to go to the tabernacle. You have to make sacrifices in order to be purified. The same with a woman who's contracted some kind of venereal disease, or perhaps has severe menstrual hemorrhaging that goes on beyond the monthly period. And this is all talked about in this chapter. Read it if you dare. And it lays out the precautions and remedies, and they're identical to those of the man who has an abnormal sexual discharge. So actually here it seems like there's some parity of expectations between the genders. But I want to touch on a case from the New Testament about a woman in this condition. I mean, what if a woman has some kind of condition like this, let's say hemorrhaging, that just doesn't clear up? something she has to live with for years. Well, in Mark chapter 5 and parallels, Matthew and Luke parallels, there's a story about a woman who comes to Jesus and she's unclean. She has a flow of blood. And most scholars think this is, a vaginal flow of blood, a discharge. And because of that, she's been ritually impure for 12 years. So she's in a state where she pretty much, according to the law, can't have contact with anybody. She's, for all practical purposes, a social untouchable. She can't go to the synagogue. She can't enter the temple. She can't mingle with others in the marketplace. Okay? And she has spent her entire fortune trying to find some kind of a cure. And her condition's only gotten worse. So she's desperate. But she hears that Jesus is in town, in Capernaum. She thinks to herself, you remember the story? If only I what? If only I touch the hem of his garment, I'll be pure. Where did she get that idea? I don't know. But she sees something in Jesus that's more powerful than her impurity. And so you remember what she does? She kind of sneaks her way through the crowd. Remember, she's untouchable. She doesn't want to make her presence known, freak people out, right? But somehow she sneaks through the crowd and she just quietly reaches behind Jesus and touches the hem of his garment. And as soon as she does, what happens? The flow stops, right? Her impurity is gone. She feels it in her body. And Jesus feels something too. He feels power go out from him. And he stops in his track and he says, somebody touched me. And the disciples are like, Lord, look at the crowds, everybody pressing against you, and yet you say, who touched me? And this woman comes forward, and she admits that she did this. Jesus says to her, daughter, your faith has made you whole. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering. And from that moment on, she's not just physically whole, she's socially whole. She's able to have a normal life again. And it's not so much because there was magic in Jesus' garment. What does Jesus say has made her whole? Her faith in him. Right? So what I find so fascinating here is that usually in the Old Testament, impurity is contagious. But when Jesus comes on the scene, holiness becomes contagious. It works the other way. We're going to see that again in a few minutes. Any questions or comments here? Yeah.
Some editorial bias does creep into the Gospels. Because Luke omits the part that she wasted all of her money on doctors. He makes that
You're right.
He's a doctor.
Absolutely right.
But Peter makes sure that we know that the physicians had completely failed.
Yeah. So Luke the physician just kind of, we'll leave that part on the cutting room floor. That's not essential to the story.
The way it is, because she had tried all of human remedies.
Right. Yeah, and she hadn't really gotten any better. So I don't want my audience thinking we're a bunch of quacks. So a little job security there, right? All right. I agree. Some of this stuff is weird. Some of this stuff is just like, it just seems overkill. I know. But when you have some knowledge of this system, I do think it sheds light on some other stories in the Bible that otherwise you might not really grasp the depth of, like Jesus' interaction with this woman, or the story of Bathsheba, right? So forth. So anyway, let's move on. We'll get out of the not safe for work not safe for worship section. I think that's what the W stands for there. Okay, laws that pertain to skin disease. Leviticus 13 and 14. It's the part you've all been waiting for. This word is usually translated leprosy, but when you read through the chapter, it's pretty clear it's not about necessarily leprosy as we think of it today, which is Hansen's disease, okay? Because it sounds like a range of skin diseases that were potentially defiling. Plus, it uses the same word to refer to some kind of discoloration in fabric and in houses, mold and mildew. That's not Hansen's disease. That's something else. But it's this spreading, infectious element that's defiling, right? Whether it's skin or fabric or in the walls of a home. Now, Leviticus 13 deals with skin diseases, okay? And I don't think they really had doctors like they had them maybe in Luke's time. And a lot of time the priest would serve that role. The priest would be the one you went to if you had something wrong physically. And the priest would examine you and make some kind of prescription, okay? And determine if this was something that was ritually defiling or not. And by the way, even in fairly modern times, a lot of preachers were expected to have medical knowledge. A lot of circuit riding preachers were required to have a little bit of basic medical training, first aid and the like. So, anyway, next slide. So, the detection, so if somebody suspects they have some kind of a defiling skin condition, they go to the local priest. The priest examines them, and if something concerning is detected, the person is usually isolated for a period of 7 days. Then they come back and they're reevaluated. And this could go on a few times until the priest is sure that it's either not something to be concerned about or it's something that's defiling, right? And again, this isn't a moral category of defilement. This is ritual defilement. And so what does the priest look for? Well, it gets pretty involved, pretty detailed in that chapter, right? Looks at the color of the tissue, looks at how deep the red infected area, whatever is in the skin. Is it superficial or does it go into the lower tissue there? Are there signs of the disease spreading to other tissues, or is it contained and reducing? The color of the hair in the infected area. One of my favorite sections is in this chapter is when a guy comes to the priest and he's lost hair and he's gone bald. And the priest is like, well, let's see if this is anything. And it says, if it's not red, if it's not spreading, if there's nothing really else going on, he's not unclean, he's just bald. And it's kind of my motto for life. I'm not unclean, I'm just bald. Bald people rights. Anyway, next slide. So why is there this apparent stigma against skin diseases? And I think it goes back to some of the stuff we've been talking about life versus death, creation and chaos. What's normal? What's disorder? And skin that is raw and discolored and perhaps even flaking off. I'm not talking about dandruff here. We're talking about something more serious. It's something associated with death, with fleshly decay. And so it puts a person in a state of unwholeness, of ritual impurity. Okay? I know. Let's get through the rest of this part. Those diagnosed with a defiling skin condition, they basically became untouchable. You remember some of the restrictions imposed on them? They had to live outside the camp, outside the city. It says in Leviticus 13 they're to live alone, but we know from other passages in the Bible that they often lived in groups Because guess what? They need fellowship. They need community. And so if they can't have that with the rest of society, at least these lepers or people like that can have that kind of association with each other. So oftentimes you'll see them in groups. There's a story in Luke's gospel about 10 lepers coming to Jesus looking to be restored. So they live outside the camp. They wear torn clothes. They kept their hair, assuming they had hair, unkempt. They covered the lower part of the face. And so they had those face masks that everybody here loves, you know. And they had to cry out, unclean, unclean. So if anybody in a state of ritual purity came in their vicinity, they had to alert them. Don't touch me. I'm unclean. Doesn't this sound like an awful way to live? Yeah. Me too. And that's why you see so many people in the Old Testament like just desperate for cleansing. There's a story of Naaman, this great Syrian general who goes to the opposing a nation, to Israel, to seek out this prophet. He has this little Israelite slave girl who's told him, there's a man who can make you better. And he swallows his pride and he dips himself 7 times in the River Jordan. And he was desperate. But there are cases of these conditions clearing up after time. And in cases where they did clear up, there's a process for purifying the person, bringing them back into society, readmitting them to sacred space. It's very involved. The priest would meet with this person outside the camp, inspect them. If everything looked good, there was this ritual involving 2 birds. One bird was killed, slaughtered over a bowl of water. And in the water, there was yarn, scarlet yarn, cedar wood, and hyssop. These are items often associated with cleansing in the Old Testament. And so that blood of the dead bird is mixed into the water. And he takes that mixture and sprinkles it 7 times on the leprous, formerly leprous man. And then as for the living bird, that living bird is dipped into the water and set free. And it reminds me of the scapegoat ritual, where one animal is killed and the other is set free to take the impurity elsewhere. You see that, what I'm talking about there? It's really, really, I think it's kind of fascinating, but I feel sorry for the little bird that got killed. But then the man would have to, after receiving this treatment, would, what was it? He would wash his clothes. He would shave off all the hair of his body, okay? And then immerse himself, ritual bath, and then be allowed to enter the camp. But he wouldn't be able to live inside his own tent until the 7-day period had passed. And on the 8th day, he would present himself again to the priest. He would go through another ritual bath, another shaving, and then there are all these sacrifices that will be offered, including a reparation or guilt offering for any maybe holy item that had been contaminated by his contact. So it's really involved stuff, okay? And there are special provisions made for people who are poor, where they didn't have to offer such elaborate sacrifices. Now, I haven't talked about cleansing of fabric and homes yet, which I know is the most important thing to you guys, because it's spring cleaning time, or maybe even a little bit beyond that. But we still have some spring cleaning to do. So what if you've got this nice sweater in your wardrobe that's got some kind of funky stain on it? You know, like, I don't think that's gravy. I think that's mildew. I think there's something really wrong here. Well, you call the priest over. The priest takes a look at it, says, wash it. I'll come back and look at it in 7 days and reevaluate. And if this thing is spread, If it is some kind of spreading mold, you take the thing and you burn it. Now, what if you've got a house that's got some kind of black mold on the walls? I mean, this stuff is, a problem today, right? Did you know, you guys remember the preacher over at Antioch Christian who died a few years ago? He died from some kind of a complication related to mold in the house or something, I think. But really sad thing. But I mean, this could be lethal, right? What do you do if you've got some kind of spreading mold in the walls? Well, the priest comes over, he checks things out, he closes the house for 7 days, comes back. If it's spreading, well, you can do a couple of things. Maybe you say, all right, let's tear out this section, replaster, restone, whatever. But if it comes back, the whole house has to go down. The house is leveled. It's not fit to be lived in. It's condemned, right? We still have laws like that in place in our society, right? This house isn't fit to live in. It's unsafe. It's condemned. So some of this stuff sounds really harsh. Some of this stuff sounds fairly practical to me. Now, I want to finish up with this. There's also if a house is cleansed, there's that similar kind of thing with the birds. So, all right, yes. Hey. Oh, yes. Mhm. I forgot to mention that, right. So there's this part of the guilt offering that the leper has to offer is this hin of oil. And the oil is taken along with some of the blood of the guilt offering and is smeared on his right earlobe, right big thumb, right big toe. It's exactly right. It's the same kind of procedure you see with the consecration of priests in Leviticus 8. It's this way of dedicating that person, the whole person, again, back to the Lord. Okay. Yeah. Thank you for pointing that out. Yeah. I think that's neat. Yes, Beth. Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. Mm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. To come out with these problems, even though they're not of necessarily of a moral nature, they're embarrassing. And they can, yes, and social consequences. Yeah. Right. Amen. Right. Right. Yeah. There's a decontamination for sinners in Christ, and it's ongoing, and it requires that element too of just being able to unburden ourselves to somebody who can pray for us and hold us accountable. And that sometimes a hard thing, but it's freeing. I want to close with this. I know we're out of time. One of the interesting things about Jesus when he deals with lepers and they come to him for cleansing is he often says, I'm willing, be clean, and he'll make a point of touching them. He could have said, be clean. He can do long distance miracles, but he makes a point of touching the untouchable. And he transfers that holiness, that purity to them. And I've often wondered, did Jesus contract that disease? Or, well, maybe not the disease. Did he contract the ritual impurity? And there's this one place in Mark that has always fascinated me because it talks about, the leper kind of going on his way and doing what the law required of him. But as for Jesus, he had to go out and live in solitary places away from the towns because everywhere he went, he was just swarmed. And it's almost like Jesus becomes, stigmatized in some way. Like he's not able to enjoy normal social relations anymore, not because he's become unclean, but because of the reaction to him, right? The reputation he's acquired. Which in some ways is kind of tragic, but that's also why he came, right? To bear our diseases, to take upon himself that which alienates us from God, and to restore us. Thank God for Jesus. We'll continue next week. Leviticus 16 and 17.